Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, good to see you.
It's great to be back, Paul.
I think you're in another part of your house. We're not quite out of
I am. I
the
am. I
COVID.
picked up my luggage and I moved to a different place. I figured it's about time since we're almost a year in here.
Yes, yes. So we have a great guest for us today, right? And do you want to do the honors?
Sure, we really do. We're excited to have Debra Jasper with us today. The name may be familiar to those who had listened to some of the Reimagining Retirement Forum series. Debra joined us as a panelist. She's founder and CEO of a company called Mindset Digital, and I'm very excited about our topic today. Storytelling is something close to my heart. Years of being involved in Toastmasters, co-hosting TEDx Hartford. Stories are things that I know are valuable, and I'm excited to have the conversation with Debra today. But before we jump in and dive to talk about not only audio storytelling, but also how to tell a story on a small screen or through a computer, I want to know more about Debra yourself. Please introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what got you here today.
Yeah, so thanks, Paul and Laura. It's great to be here. Laura, I did not know that you had a deep passion for storytelling, so we will talk offline. And actually, my background is my PhD is in micro storytelling. So, and I grew up, I often tell people, my dad was an amazing storyteller in Southern Kentucky. And I came by this honestly because people would come from miles around to hear him tell stories. And you do realize that if we want our clients to tune in today, with everyone being not just distant, not just distracted, but totally distressed. There's a lot of great brain science behind this. It's just harder for them to listen, harder for them to remember what you told them. So if we want them to remember, we're going to have to not just tell stories, but tell visual stories, give better presentations, as you said, designed for a small screen. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how to do that and teaching C-suite executives how to do that.
Well, it's great. Why don't we just jump in because this has
Sure.
been a favorite topic of ours, and maybe you can answer this question. Debra, why is it so hard for founders to tell their story?
Yeah. So there's three curses. And when we work with and I work a lot with executives and for this audience, because I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs, right? I started my company in my basement in Ohio and left my role at Ohio State. I'd launched the first social media fellowship for journalists in the world, and companies were saying, "Hey, love what you're teaching 60 minutes about Twitter. Can you teach us?" And in 2018, I was named one of the top female entrepreneurs in North America. So, and I took on private equity and one of the few women-owned entrepreneurs. There's not enough of us taking on private equity. So, as we've discussed, I did the tour through New York, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you get investors to tune in, and just how do you get clients to tune in. And so, I think the big challenge for a lot of the folks that I coach is I call it the three curses. And I will call this up. I know most people are just listening to this, but if you do happen to be watching it, then I will walk you through it. Can you guys see this?
Yes, we
We
can.
got it.
For those of you who are watching it, this is really important. There are three curses that stand between all of us and our audience. And the first curse is the curse of competition. It is really hard for people to understand how hard it is to get people to tune in. So I do a lot of did a lot of big keynote talks. This was a keynote I gave at Ohio Health a couple of years ago, and I loved the movement and the energy, and people show up and you're on stage and we have some expectation of attention. But today, our audiences are at home. Even if we're presenting to, investors, they're home, maybe their cat's walking in front of their screen. It's just tougher. Their kids are trying to talk to them. They decide to get up and get a cup of coffee. So if we as entrepreneurs are trying to raise money or we're trying to get our clients excited about our work, we have to recognize we have to fight for attention. And that means we have to change how we do business because attention is everything. And so much is coming at us. There's the breaking news and the endless Zoom meetings and the 147 emails a day, that the competition is fierce. So that's part of that's one of the biggest curses, is the curse of competition. And if we want to break through the noise, we have to break that curse of competition if we have any hope of getting people to tune in. So is that helpful as you're thinking about the first challenge?
Well, it is, and I guess what is it that makes people have a hard time like stepping out here, Deborah? Is it that I have invested so much of this business in my heart and soul that I have a hard time expressing it? Or is it that I just haven't, maybe the reason that got me to this point at which I am asking for money or trying to attract other founders or get my first contract is that I was a great technician. I was a great
Right.
something. I was
Yes.
not a person to tell
Yes.
frame a story.
And I didn't set Paul up for this because he doesn't even know the curses. But that brings me to the second curse. So the first curse is the competition. And that is, it's just hard to get people to tune in. It's easy to get a message out, hard to get a message in. Second curse, though, and this is what you're talking about, is the curse of knowledge. And I think this is the biggest issue for us. It's when we know our stuff so well, we think we're conveying it. And I call it, that moment where the client's like, huh? And the curse of knowledge is when you're talking in your tribal language and you've spent, I have a PhD in educational policy. I could say I studied pedagogy and I did a Foucaultian analysis of micro resistances to power structures. And I think that that's going to engage you and maybe make me look smart. And you're like, ugh, later. So the curse of knowledge is huge. The third curse, though, and it's equally big, especially I think for those folks that started companies because they have a deep knowledge and a deep specialty, and that's the curse of expertise. We've all done it. It's when you're talking to impress rather than inform. So you're putting on your let me use all my big words and my jargon, and I'm going to make you think I'm really smart. And we think that that's building trust, but studies actually show it reduces trust. No one likes to go to a party and have someone say, let me tell you how great I am. And let me tell you about my great car. And did I mention, my great vacation? We just don't, we're not tuning into that. So we have to break it down if we have any hope that our clients or investors are going to tune in.
Yeah, I'll actually share a story with you. So the real story, my daughter. So she left her consulting job, went, threw caution to the wind in the middle of COVID, got a job with a startup. And from my perspective, they were getting a lot of traction. You can see the noise. It did the sort of standard pivot, threw some people out. Daughter's like going for it. She's going crazy, by the way, living in this house.
Yeah.
I don't know if she won't listen to this thing. And so it's like I've got this like raccoon in a cage, and she finds an apartment in New York. I move her back on Wednesday, get her in. By the way, Debra, it's like a cage,
Sure. So small, right? Yes.
So small. And I get her, I'm like, oh, phew, every piece in the house, everybody's Thursday, the company went belly up.
Yeah. Especially now, right? COVID has been so hard.
Yeah.
400,000 small businesses have closed. Yeah.
Well, it is. And you talk about micro stories because she was always like creating micro stories for the value of the company to, the people that are selling their products to. And, I will tell you, happy ending. She ends up working for the VC firm that was funding this thing. But what she heard was the founder had a struggle telling his story to investors.
Sure.
I'm going to make up the number. He went to 60 VC firms, other VC firms, to make the pitch and didn't get the money. So how?
Okay.
What do you do? What do you tell a founder like that?
So we know the curses, right?
Yeah.
So now how do we overcome them?
Right.
So, here's what I think is funny. And I love, Laura, that you were talking about going to Toastmasters, because I think a lot of people spend significant amount of time trying to become a better speaker, which is part of it. But the second part of it that I think people often miss, I was coaching a banker, a C-suite executive, and he had done not only Toastmasters, but he had done a lot of work with improv. And so he was just trying to get more comfortable on the stage. But what he didn't do was invest any money in his presentation. So he had a pretty good persona, he was pretty comfortable, but his presentation was terrible. It was meandering. It didn't have a good opening. It didn't have a good ending. And so I've seen very good speakers show up with bad presentations and it just takes them way down. And very okay speakers show up with visual killer presentation decks and it absolutely takes them up. So when I'm coaching people, we start actually with the presentation, because when you have a great presentation deck, by default, you'll be a better speaker.
Right.
And what we're doing, I'm coaching someone right now, and we're presenting their deck, or we're designing their presentation deck from scratch. So part of it starts with, I ask 3 questions. What is your company about? If you're, doing this for investors, and you've got to be able to tell me that in one line, and it's so hard for people. The second, though, is so what? Why does your client care? Or why does the investor care? Too often we start with our history and no one cares. I can't spend a lot of time saying, oh, my dad was a storyteller. You don't know me and no one cares. You have to start with what's in it for them. You can mention it, add a little bit of sort of personality, but you got to get on to very quickly about what's in it for me. And then the third what is, what am I asking you to do next? So very often we do not have a clear call to action. So we talk about ARC is our methodology. It has to be clear call to action, clear recommendation, and clear context in that order.
Now, out of everything that you've seen so far, working with different individuals, whether they be founders or corporate types, are there reoccurring themes specifically in there that
Yes.
people continuously trip over?
Yes. The number one biggest mistake is the data dump. Everybody has a ton of information and they just want to give you all of it because they're so excited. So they think the investor wants to know every detail or the client, and we don't. We want you to get down to what's most essential to share. So the other, we have a whole program in this called the SOS habit, and we developed it because it was like people they want to meander and the stories don't really go anywhere and they have too much text on the deck, so on the on the slide, so then they forget what the point was. So SOS is every presentation you give to an investor, every email you send to an investor or a client, every piece of content that goes out the door has to be short, organized, and skimmable. And when we do the program, we have very specific checks. So when I work with folks on their presentations, for example, we just run a check on the accessibility score
Mhm.
of the language in their presentation. And you need to be writing at about a score of 50 to 60. Anything below that, you're getting into, Harvard Law Review. I was working with a guy the other day, and he designed a big presentation for his clients. And I showed him it was harder to read than a hospital regulatory notice. It's like, look, when your presentation deck is harder to read than a HIPAA notice, people are going to tune you out. So it's just fun to do those kinds of assessments to say, nope, you have to be, this is the score. Here's a quick tip for the audience. Just go through your presentation. You can't have more than three syllable words per paragraph. Ideally, no more than three. Ideally, you'll never have a paragraph on a slide. So no more than three syllable words per slide.
So something that I recall from one of the first conversations we had together, the slide methodology, I think you have is unique.
Yeah.
And for those who are watching the screen, you noticed that it was fast paced, it was moving, there were multiples, where a lot of us have been told in business terms, have no more than one slide per
Right.
minute that you're presenting. Talk to us
Yes.
about your theory on that.
So I love that. I'm really glad you asked that question. And it makes me, let me just show you one other. I'll just show you for those of you who can see it. And then for those of you who can't, I'll explain it. But so we have at Mindset Digital what we call rapid visual storytelling. And that means that something needs to move on the screen every 6 to 7 seconds, which is such a shock for people. But I'm kind of going to pull back the curtain here. And this is a presentation I just delivered for HSMAI, which is the largest hotel association I think it's in the world. So, but notice how many slides are here. So typically in a 1 hour on stage talk, I go through 365 slides. So it is rapid visual storytelling. In a regular talk, though, like a virtual talk, I'll do about 200 slides. And if I'm doing an investor deck, if I'm helping someone with an investor deck, it won't be that many slides because they're going to have a lot of data. But we do show them how to unpack numbers in a way they can take them in. But if you think about it, one of my leads, when you say, what is this story about? I start by saying, here's the challenge. It's how to capture attention and create impact in a world of social distance. And if you get to watch this, you'll see that the words are coming in as I talk, and then slides are moving, and it's all animated. And then you can say virtual is the new reality, at least for now. We know the impact of the crisis. A lot of us are working from home. Notice how many things are coming in on the slides. So another quick tip when you're thinking about presenting, especially to investors, is say dog, see dog. If I'm talking about a dog, show me a dog. This is an old journalism tip. And so if I'm talking about distracted clients, I'm going to show you someone who looks distracted. So whatever I'm talking about, I need to be showing you. And then we do entire sections. I have a design for attention masterclass on just how to unpack numbers. Because if you put up a lot of numbers and say, I know you can't see this, but then the investors are going, why are you showing me this then? So you've got to rethink the slide if you can't see it on a small screen.
Yeah, I guess a couple questions for you. Emotion, right? I've seen some very compelling founder story rooted in a problem that happened to them. They lost the dad, they lost their mom, something happened. Where does that emotional connection fit in sort of the arc of a story that's
Sure.
compelling enough for somebody to write a check?
Right. So the micro story is critical, and what it means for me is critical. I mean, you have to have I call it your storyline. This was great, actually. I had a chance because I mentioned EY, named us one of the top female entrepreneurial firms in North America. So we got to go I got to go to Monaco, not last year, the year before. I have to think now. 2020 was a blur, right? But I met they were to their top 500 entrepreneurs conference, and they also brought in for the women. EY's had really invested in helping female entrepreneurs raise money and just get more visibility, and they would bring in people who coached us. And what is our walkaway line? And a storyline is something that's really memorable that people are gonna just it'll stay with you, and a storyline when you hear it. You know that, oh, that's catchy, or that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes we'll say we're out to rid the world of bad corporate training and people nod. Or I have a bunch of storylines when I do training, like casual does not mean careless. That's the thing that people always tweet. So people have to have good memorable storylines, and then they can build scenarios. Those are the micro stories. So let me tell you about Sarah. Here's Sarah's challenge, and then build out that storyline.
Yeah, one of the best people I've ever seen talk is actually somebody from the insurance industry. You've listened to Joe Jordan's talks, right? At
Oh
Limerick.
yeah, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of good narrative stories.
he's very interesting how he'll take a micro story of somebody and kind of
Mhm.
build on it. It's interesting. Um, I I remember, well, for 2 or 3 years, we were at the same company. I would see the same speech 8 times in a year, right? And
Yeah.
it'll be like, okay, he's not going to get me to cry. He's not going to get me to cry. Oh, he did it. Now, how would you dissect Joe's, like the way Joe
Yeah.
tells his story, how he connects? Why is he a successful storyteller?
So when we pull it when we tease apart storytelling, we say, look, and I talk sometimes about Rudolph, right? If I just said, hey, there's a reindeer, that's not a story. If I said there's Santa, there's not a story. If you say there's a storm, now I've added intention. So just having a character is not a story. You've got to have tension, and then you have to have an outcome. And so helping people walk through that formula, so it seems like a very simple very simple formula, but it's harder than it looks. And it goes back to that second what is in it for me? Why does the client care? So often people will tell me stories, but it doesn't impact my life. Or they're telling me stories with a lot of vague generalities, and I'm like, still don't know why I care. So the big challenge is people will start to tell you stories, and you'll say, okay, and then why do I care? Because you've got to get them to what's in it for me? What's the meaning for me? That makes a big difference.
Yeah. And how did you use 3 words? What did you say? Tension, outcome. You said, what were the 3 words you
So
used
you have
for
to have your characters,
characters?
you have to have an event.
Right.
It's Christmas, and you have to have tension. There's a storm, and
Right.
kids might not get toys, right? So you have to oftentimes people will have an event or they'll have characters,
Yeah.
but there's no tension, and then there's no why do I care? We care because the kids won't get toys.
Yeah.
So you've got to have that most essential part of that is why do I care?
Yeah. One set of words or different words saying the same thing, structure that really caught me once, and it's kind of burning my skull at this point is and but therefore as a
Mhm.
pattern. It's
Right.
always been tough for
Yes.
agents to find clients, and it's always been very, very hard to get in front of them and find them. But you know what? COVID actually made it worse because nobody would want to meet, and you couldn't find clients and you couldn't meet with them. So what did we do? We actually developed a digital platform that helps you actually sell virtually in people's homes wherever you are and actually amplify your business. So we've kind of put, it's
Right.
structured, but it's still long, right?
And here's what's missing from that. There's not a character,
Right.
right? And so it's way better if you're saying, look, we were working with George, and this guy has been super successful forever. And then COVID hit, and his wife got sick, and whatever the story is. But it's way more powerful if there's a real story, and I feel like, oh, I'm getting to know this guy. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes I talk about I launched the first social media fellowship for journalists in the world. I was at Ohio State, and people were like, "Why did you decide to quit?" I was teaching LinkedIn. They're like, "What do you care about that?" And this is true. So I was actually at a big financial advising firm, 15,000 advisors. I'd been there for 3 days, and there was a part of me. I was on the bus after the end of 3 days, thinking, "Do I really want to do this? Why am I doing this? I could be doing a lot of things." And this guy came up to me at the end of this LinkedIn day of teaching LinkedIn, and he was teary. And he said, "I just want you to know," I still get cold chills when I think about it. And he said, I thought I was gonna have to retire. And because I thought this social media stuff, I don't care about this stuff, and I'm overwhelmed by it. And after this 3 days, I'm staying in. You have given me the confidence I need to make this work. And I realized, oh, I'm not teaching LinkedIn or presentations. I'm moving people from reluctance to relevance. So now that was my story, and that's my storyline. And it helps, of course, if it's an authentic story and it really happens. So because it did, and it to this day, I mean, I got teary. And I started realizing we're all overwhelmed, and it's so many of us today feel like, especially this year, do I want can I learn one more thing? Really? Now I have to get on LinkedIn, and I have to optimize my profile. And now Debra's saying I have to tell rapid visual storytelling, and now I have to master presentations and what? I mean, people are wiped out. And so you have to figure out how to get them excited about it, how to help them understand it's actually not that hard once you get over that initial sort of learning curve. And if you embrace it, you're going to get excited about it at the other end. Because then he called me like 3 days later and said, my kids just called and said, we did his LinkedIn makeover. And he said, my kids just called and said, I look better than they do on social media. You could see his energy had gone up, and that stuff makes you happy. So I
Right.
do think working with people who are they hate this stuff. I hated this stuff. I was a long form narrative writer. I was an investigative journalist, and to come to this, to do this, you have to find meaning in it. So narrative stories have to give you the meaning, storylines have to give you the meaning simply and succinctly. And if you're presenting to investors and you don't have those kinds of compelling stories that show how you're changing lives, or at least transforming people's, careers or whatever it is that you're doing, you're not going to get the investment.
Yeah. It's real interesting. So you solved it for me for my recorded pitch, right? I know the slides, I know all of the stuff. Now I'm in a small environment where, one day this will happen sooner rather than later. I'm sitting down with Laura across the table and I'm asking her for money. How does that change? Debra, I don't have 200 slides. I'm not going to bring a
Right.
deck. How do you take what that magic you just described, but I take it to Laura
Yeah.
across
And
the
it goes
table?
back to the data dump. I mean, that happens whether you have slides or not. You can't sit down and try to tell me about what you care about and give me all the information that you care about, because I don't care. I am amazed at the number of people who still send me emails saying, my name is. Well, if I don't know your name, I'm deleting the email. That is not a good way to start. So you have like maybe a couple of minutes. I'm making a snap decision about whether your content and whether your company is worth my time. So if you can't get early on, I mean, that's what you got to be spending your time on, that killer opening. And then you've got to really practice, because the temptation is always to tell me too much.
Mhm. Well, and not only practice, but receive feedback. I think that's
Yes.
something that a lot of people don't bother to do, is receive feedback, not only from one source, but multiple sources with different viewpoints. Because that is one of the most beneficial things that I think a person could do once they've crafted it, is you have to go back and iterate. How can I make this better? How can I make this stronger?
Yes.
And like you had mentioned of why do I care? I mean, understand who you're speaking with. If I'm going to show up in front of you, Deborah, and I'm going to ask for money from you, I better have done my research. I better have looked in your LinkedIn profile. What have you been
Yes.
tweeting lately? How can I relate to you in the first 30 seconds of sitting down? So it shows that I cared enough about the contact I'm having with you to perhaps tell you a story that I think is going to catch your attention based on the content you've shared out most recently on your social media platforms.
I love that, Laura. It is so smart. The people who email me, I had someone email me the other day and they had actually read my the synopsis of my dissertation. I was like, okay, now that's impressive. Like, you guys know a lot about me. So I do think it's really smart. They went to my LinkedIn profile. They knew I had a boat because I said, away from work, I'm either on the water or skiing. They just knew a lot about me, and it just, you're already in an instant rapport.
Mhm.
And don't underestimate, short does not mean rude.
Right.
So you can't just sit down and say, let me tell you why I need money. Right. I mean, you have to build it's relationship building still matters, but starting with why you care doesn't mean that you don't start first with just who are they and who are you briefly. Just sometimes people want to tell you, you ask them a quick question about their history and they'll spend 15 minutes and you're like, I did not need to know where you graduated from. Really.
But
So I love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the one or two pieces that you can pick up, that you carry through and build relationships. There's someone I'm thinking of. It was actually the first week on the job. I jumped on the train with Reimagine here, and it was like, yeah, let's go to Vegas for a large insurtech conference. This is a great idea. So go out to dinner one evening with a group of individuals. It was my first time meeting them all. Knew them from the periphery, and one gentleman was talking about his backpacking adventures. Happens to be that I love to hike. We go on backpacking trips every year. And ever since then, it's the piece of the relationship where I was able to click on fast,
Yes.
carry through, and all of a sudden you have the rapport that would have taken. I mean, I could have never built it over Zoom per se
Right.
in the same way. So it's just interesting to listen as much as it is to speak. And I think together it's a powerful thing.
So this is why I love this. This is why when we do LinkedIn makeovers, we say they should be the powerful story of you. And we have one away from work line. It's not Facebook, but in that about section should be not what you do. You've heard me talk about this, but what you love about what you do for others. And then one away from work line. And because my away from work line said you'll find me boating on Lake Erie or skiing out west, I ended up I had a great client relationship with a guy down in Miami who has a boat, and he's like, what kind of boat did you have? And it's exactly that, right? You end up, I'm still doing work with a top 10 insurance firm because he has a boat and I do too. I swear we co-coach each other, but every other week we really just check in and say, how's your boating? So that kind of, we do business with people we like.
Mhm.
And we are always looking, that's going to matter whether we're doing it virtually
Absolutely.
or we're doing it, through live events. Again, the people ask two questions when they look you up. Do I like you and do I want to work with you?
So Deborah, how has a year on Zoom changed forever the way we tell our stories?
That's such a great. So I have a new book coming out called Small Screen Big Impact. And for the research that I'm doing on it right now, one of the things that we're looking at is just how hard it is to tone. Tone is a big challenge on Zoom. We can't notice I do more sort of exasperated. Those of you who can't see this, I move my hands a lot more up high because we can't read body language. So we have a harder time figuring out body language. We have a harder time just, you can't go to dinner and just talk about something besides, like, you're on the call, you're talking business, and then it's kind of hard to hang out awkwardly. I don't think that these big happy hours have worked very well because you can't, people want to have one-on-one conversations. We're figuring it out. But Paul, I was working with an executive in Canada the other day and he said, I feel like we're in the 1950s of Zoom meetings, like 2 years from now, or video meetings. 2 years from now, we're going to look back and go, that was you know, so 1955. And I think there is a little bit of that. A lot's going to change. I've been looking at what Facebook is doing, where we're going to have avatars that are absolutely all our facial expressions, right? And we're going to be having meetings in virtual meeting spaces and with avatars who look just like us. I'm like, can we make them look better than us? But I think there's going to be a lot. I taught Twitter in Ukraine in 2008 to the Ukrainian Council of Ministers as part of a democratization project. That's a whole different story. But I came back and went, when you change how information flows in society, you change society. And we're at that inflection point again. I came back and said Twitter and Facebook are going to change the world. And now I think, there's no going back. Yes, we will meet in person again, but it's going to be a lot more hybrid. Companies are going to say, do a Zoom call. I'm not going to pay for you to,
Right.
fly to 6 conferences this year. So I think that's going to be a big shift. It's going to take a while.
Well, and we've been struggling with startups we've had to say, how do we create these connections with companies where barriers come down, you get trust established with carriers that want to do business with startups, and get the startups out of a pitch mode, right? So they don't come off as, I've got my speech and I'm going to read it to you no matter what.
Yes.
It's hard. This has been hard.
Yes. Okay, I just did a session. I've done 62 webinars or something. I need to count because I did 14 this last month. So I've been doing a lot of virtual talks. But one of them was for 800, or it was 800 vendors from this group out of Australia. And I did a whole talk on avoid the vendor voice and adopt the advisor voice. So a big part of it is people have to, that word pitch, immediately everybody just goes, I think people are more sophisticated now. We know it when we see it. We just don't want to deal with it. So I talk a lot about priming for the positive and how to avoid. I have 6 fast fixes for avoiding the pitch. And I do think it's incredibly important that we elevate our voice and we meet as equals. That's especially true with clients. And there's small ways that we are not meeting as equals with investors and clients. Some of them are, I no longer thank you for your time because I gave you my time too. And there's no reason I should be diminishing the value of my time. I say it was terrific talking with you, but I don't say, oh, Paul, thank you so much for taking time to meet with me. We say, excitement is good, desperation is not. So helping people, and we don't, we especially, and I coach when I talk to women entrepreneurs, especially women overuse the exclamation point in particular. Men can too, but there's never a reason for 2 exclamation points at the end of a sentence. No one is that hyper excited, or they could be, but no, that edges into, too much. So meeting as equals is an essential part of getting investment. You want your investors to feel lucky, really, to get to work with you, not in an arrogant way, but you don't want to come across as over eager because it makes people shy of investing with you.
Okay, now my last loaded question here. Do you think the virtual environment puts women at a more equal or less than equal footing when
You think
trying
I'm
to get
touching
money
that?
in?
There's a lot of work being done on this in terms of all of us, in terms of age discrimination. I was absolutely thrilled to see. I posted something a couple of months ago. It's been my most popular post by far. It has like 30,000 plus views. And I was saying there should be a 50 over 50, not just a 40 under 40. I didn't launch my company until I was in my 40s. And at some point I felt like that's when I felt like I had the life experience to do something kind of crazy and say to my husband, hey, can we mortgage our house? I feel really strongly about this. He's like, what? I mean, you have to, and that was in my 40s, which is unusual, right? A lot of people think that that's only happening when you're in your 20s, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs out here who are in their 40s and in their 50s and taking risks, and because they feel like they have more knowledge now. And so there's a lot to be said. There's a lot going on now where I think we're challenging gender stereotypes, age discrimination. There is a great study where they were talking, I think some coaching for women who are pitching that's really important is sometimes investors, they're saying, are more likely to ask women, how are you not going to fail? And they ask men, how are you going to knock it out of the park? Well, what I tell women is if they say, how are you not going to fail? You need to answer, here's how I'm going to knock it out of the park. Don't start talking about failure. It doesn't matter what they're asking you. Answer the question you want to answer. So part of it is thinking about the rhetoric, the language that the questioners are using, and thinking through how you want to answer those questions.
Yeah,
I thought that was fascinating, actually. That study, fascinating.
It absolutely is. I actually had a conversation yesterday with my sister, and it was around a similar-esque topic. And I was mulling on it after the fact, and the whole thing came up. It was male versus female. Is it going to change? Is it just an instance? Now that there's more attention on the male versus female dynamic and how things are handled. And I came across a quote, and it made a lot of sense and it resonated. It's when you think about problems like that, you have to decide, is this a moment or is this a movement?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that the movement obviously has started, but it continues and progresses. So 10 years from now, we won't even have to have these conversations because, there's going to be more equality for certain things.
10 years, Laura, I love your enthusiasm. I think it may take a little longer than that, but of course, I feel like I've been fighting this for a long time.
I think we can get productively heard very loud, very quickly in a positive manner to help speed up. I'm curious and hopeful, obviously 10 years.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree though that we're making much more progress a lot quicker. As I mentioned, I was in Monaco at that entrepreneur conference, and there are 500 global entrepreneurs, amazing people, but only 3 women.
Mm-hmm.
And it just tells you the challenge we have. I was a judge for EY this past year, and I was choosing top entrepreneurs for that event. And it's so fascinating to watch women come on and make the pitch to judges and watch men come on. I said I could write an entire dissertation on just the language difference between what women are the language women use when they do this versus men. In fact, I'd love to write a topic on that. But there's a lot around. I think women have to walk this fine line between aggressive Angie and apologetic Annie. That there's a lot of studies on this, right? Where women, if perceived as too ambitious, it's not a good thing, whereas that's just men just don't have that same challenge. But I do think a lot's going to change, and I'm, for one, thrilled to see more. I want to see more women on the revenue side of the house. I want more women to want to get into sales, to embrace sales. We ran an ad. You guys will think this is fascinating, and I thought this was fascinating. I had one topic was sales director, and the other title was client support director, and I had twice as many women apply for the second job.
Yeah.
Same role, but you take sales out of it. And so I also think companies are going to have to start thinking about the language they're using. Let's do rev share and not a commission. Commission reminds people too much of kind of an old school approach. But rev share, who doesn't want to share in the revenue? There's small, and those are rhetorical flourishes, but they can make a big impact in how we're framing issues.
Mm-hmm.
No, well, this is great. Now, I'm gonna just as a startup, how can you help me, Debra? You got a good company. What can you do for me?
Sure. So what we're doing for a lot of small companies is they call us, we put them through presentation training, we redesign their presentations, we do coaching for them. We put them through training in how to write for action. So that SOS training, we can analyze their communication and say, here's where you're missing the mark. So we work with companies large and small. I mean, our largest rollout of that Right for Action training was 58,000 seats, and our smallest rollout is 1 seat. So what's great is we've been able to scale this for large organizations, but also make it doable for smaller teams too. But this takes coaching. And you know what? To your point, Laura, when I was trying to be a keynote speaker, because I really wanted to do that, I had a pact with myself. You were talking about practice earlier. I ended up saying, I'm going to practice the opening, and I have to land it 11 times perfectly every Saturday before I can go do anything else. And sometimes I would land it at 10 a.m. And sometimes there was one night my husband came home from work. I was still trying to land that opening because it had to be 11 times in a row. So if I messed up at the 9th time, I started from the beginning. But here's what I found. When I walked out on, like in Vegas, I was speaking at PubCon, it's 3,000 people. When I'm walking out on big stages, if you have the opening down, and it can't sound rehearsed, but if you just know you have the opening, you'll be more comfortable through the rest of it. So we also work with teams, not only on, we have them record their talks, and then we give them feedback on This is where you lost me. Here's where you have the curse of knowledge, that kind of work.
Sign me up.
I know, right?
It's really fun. I'm having a
Yeah.
blast doing it because I love the energy people get from it. Because their presentation, you give them a new presentation, they're like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is so beautiful. And your confidence goes up. When you show up with a great presentation, your confidence goes up. So it makes a big impact. You could tell I get excited about it, but it's storytelling. So, I was a journalist and I came to this and went, I thought I was a writer. And then I went, no, really, it's a storyteller. So that means you can be a public speaker, you can be a writer. So it's kind of opened up a lot of doors for our company. Being a good speaker changed. I was the national keynote speaker for Key Bank. It was one of the first things I did. So I did a 17 city tour from Florida to Alaska, speaking to women business owners for Key Bank on social. And it really opened up. I mean, you want to talk about getting clients. If you become a good public speaker, it's a great way to engage people.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool for sure.
Yeah.
And we always like to wrap these conversations with asking the question of what is your why? So not the why of Mindset Digital or the work,
Sure.
but what is Debra's why?
And it always sounds so, but I love helping people get to aha moments. I love when people call me and say, Debra, I had an email yesterday from a woman who said, I've completely changed the way I present to our board, and it's absolutely changed our conversations and our relationships. And she said in all caps, I have a saying called reduce the text, not the slides. And she said, every day I'm saying to my team, and she wrote it in all caps, reduce the text, not the slides. And it makes me smile. I get messages from people where they'll be this was before COVID, of course, but they'll be in a live event and they take pictures of really bad slides and say, you should be here. This is painful. And people, I just love that people look, we're all a little bit in pain when we're doing business. This is hard. It's hard to do business on small screens. It's hard to build connections in this new world where I can't go to coffee. I may have clients now. I'm realizing I got a client last March. I may never meet them in person, which is a weird, usually you ran into them at conferences. I've been working with this person for 10 months and I've never met them. And so I think anything that I can do to help people feel like they're building relationships and they're just having more fun and they're more relevant.
Right.
It just thrills me. I like the excitement that people get when they try new things. So for me, my why is just helping people get more excited about doing work every single day.
That's awesome. And next time we have you on, we'll have to talk about Clubhouse as the newest social media trend and how you're feeling about it at that point in time.
Okay. We'll save that for next time.
All right. Hey, Debra, thanks so much. It was great to have you back. We will absolutely try to steer a number of startups your direction. And listen, look forward to continuing our story together.
Yes, sure. I am too. Thanks so much, Paul.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.